should have finished those 2 sheets, and I didn't. So, if I've been pushing Shakespeare at you, I apologise, just a little bit.
It was inspiring.
Thank you. Right. The next thing which I want to do is just to take you again into, well, really to talk about the imagery. What he's doing here, yes, he's nailed down the rhythm, and he's using rhyme where he needs to, not in his blank verse, in Little Andy's blank verse, literally without rhymes, in his speeches. But the rhythm itself is so strong that it holds it together, and it feels like poetry. And he will occasionally throw in rhymes to make it work for you, and he will put those staggered parts in where he makes the beats come together so that you feel disturbed, that you have to rush to the end of the line, and then when he wants you to get something, he will slow it right down, and you have to say the word slowly. He's pulling and pushing you around. His use of language is that clever. Not many of us can do that. But in talking, we have to say that if you haven't noticed that, that's fine. He would not have wanted it to be seen. It's meant to be seamless. It's like, you know, when anything is done beautifully, you don't see the fabric, you don't see how it's being constructed. It just floats. And that's what he's after. And one of the things which is important, I mean, we all try and say where Shakespeare was coming from, and I have to say, nobody knows. He kept it to himself. If he wanted to discuss his plays, he didn't discuss it with me. And a lot of playwrights did. I mean, if you read Bernard Shaw, I mean, I think I did a thing on Major Barbara. There's something like 45 pages of how you should read his play before you start reading it. You know, so the play's only 100 pages long. So most playwrights are very concerned about how you tackle the stuff and how you approach it and how it should be acted. None of that. There's a little bit about acting in Hamlet where he talks about the fact that, you know, don't swing your arms about. There's no need, just say the words, and that is what he does. I mean, I actually feel that Shakespeare was listening to and reading a lot of Neoplatonism, a lot of philosophy which was current at the time. And part of the thing that they said was that you put back into the world, you analyse the world, you see how it's made, but the best way to work is with love. And you actually put that back into the situation, and it's love which teaches you. And what they recommend is learned, how do they put this? It's the actual thing. Learned ignorance is the thing. Okay? So in other words, you learn how it's all done, and then you forget how it's all done, and you just do it. And a number of times that happens in the plays. If you look at Hamlet, all the time in his soliloquies, he tries to get himself off the ground, he tries to move himself. Nothing works. In the end, it's purely spontaneous. He literally follows his instincts and acts, follows his heart. And that is the thing which is meant to come through. So although I'm unpicking it here, you have to do that to see just how skillful the man is and just why we think he's lasted. And to see why his contemporaries just thought, wow, you know, alongside him, what can we possibly do? But he would never have wanted anyone to see that, and he never wrote down how he did it. He never wrote down any of these things, and he didn't even care whether you noticed or not. As long as you paid and went to see it, that was fine. Now, one of the things that comes up over and over again in him is a lot of people say he really involves the supernatural a lot in his plays. And there is a lot of discussion about this. A lot of people say, well, he actually believed in the supernatural. And other people say, no, he didn't believe in the supernatural. He's using it as a plot device. And I go along with both arguments. I think everybody at in his day would have had experience, or if like, they would have classed it as being experience of supernatural things. They mostly were astrological. We know that when they put the globe together and stuff, there were astrological things which were contrived in the actual laying the foundation. Most buildings literally had that. An awful lot of buildings still nowadays, they find a child's shoe. It was one of the things they used to put inside a building when it was constructed. But if you look at most of the buildings in London, they were inaugurated on special days. You don't need to be Dan Brown to work out that, and a lot of them were Masons, and they took their astrology very seriously. And that fits into a whole schema of philosophy which was abound among Shakespeare's contemporaries. I mentioned this about the learned ignorance. People who had literally taken their ideas from the classicists, from Plato particularly. The Neoplatonists are people who are new Plato followers, in other words, and they're looking for this idea of a perfect form, that life is perfectible, that you can do it. And that fits along with Christianity to some degree, but it isn't Christianity. And it fits in with Catholicism, but it isn't Catholicism. So human beings are perfectible, and there is an afterlife, there is somewhere that the spirit can rise to, and the body-mind is in constant pull. And we'll hear this in lots of his speeches. And the other thing that works is that language itself and the way he manipulates it is magic. It's magic because it changes the way human beings think and feel. So I told you that society is a tuned string and there's hierarchy and all that, and then he puts his words to it and wallop, it becomes alive. So always he's talking about a magic that's magic which is structured in the words. So one of the things that we don't even know whether this is his last play. The Tempest is considered to be his last play because in it Prospero the magician retires, if you like. He ceases to become a magus, and he is a magus. He's not a wizard or a black witch or a white witch. He's a magus. He's somebody who is extremely intelligent and can control the forces of nature with his mind and with his spells, and he actually has an angel and an Ariel, a being there, and he also has a sort of half man, half beast beast with him. So he's talking about philosophical concepts in the play. But at the end, when he decides to retire, he's actually exiled on an island, and he brings, with a storm, he brings the man that's actually damaged him in his youth, and he reconciles the whole situation. And after this, he talks about literally undoing his magic and becoming just a man again. Okay? The learned ignorance. You find out the thing, you put things back together in love, and then you become human again. And so this is the speech with which he does it. Okay? This is Prospero, and the word Prospero is actually, it's Italian and Spanish, I believe, and we have a Spanish speaker amongst us tonight. It's prosperity, of course, and it's for this hope, hoping for the future, for abundance. So in that sense, would you agree, Maria? Is that a good way of translating it? And is it a boy's name in Spain, Prospero?
Prospero.
Yes. Okay. So he's meant to be, if you like, a hopeful character, if not a good guy. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherits shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. A nice little speech to bow out on, isn't it?
Very beautiful.
It is very beautiful, and you can feel, there's a sorrow there for literally what he is releasing, what he's undoing, and there's this wonderful double thing. The metaphor in that is of theatre. These are actors, and he's talking about the people, and he is an actor himself. The play is still going on, and still goes on after this. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits. Now this spirit substance is the thing he's constantly talking about. The formal aspect of things, literally the way things are fitted together, that formality of them, and the substantial, the damned substance they're made of, which won't get into the right shape, or if it does, doesn't stay in the right shape and slips out of it. Like when he's talking about degree and society, having a structure, but it's very, very hard to hold that structure because the substance itself, what it's made of, human beings, physical bodies, appetites and desires, keep bouncing out of the shape you try and put it in. Are melted into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, in other words, the insubstantial nature of the vision of this play, and don't forget they're talking about powder and paint and people in makeup, who are literally holding this form together for a couple of hours. Then they're going to go to the pub. Most of them don't understand what I've worked with actors. They don't understand what the story's about. They just know what they have to say, and they, you know, and they're looking at the time. Another 10 minutes. I was once literally working with an actor of some considerable stature, and it was a Saturday afternoon matinee. The play ran for, I think it was about 70 minutes. It was The Ballad of Reading Jail, which was written by Oscar Wilde, and it wasn't a play, sorry, it was a recital. And this guy came extremely drunk, couldn't stand up, we had to put him in a chair so he could sit down. He did the whole play. This is Robert Stevens, by the way. I won't mention his name. He's dead now, so he can't sue me. He had to sit down. At the end of the play, I said to him that it was wonderful, and he asked me if I could phone his girlfriend. You know, he was about 70. I had to phone his girlfriend because he couldn't see put his fingers in the holes. And he said to me, "I skimmed about 5 minutes of it today." More little back to the pub. But of course he didn't say that. He said, "I skimmed about 5 minutes of it then." It's completely different. But that's, you know, so this is the whole fabric. It is insubstantial. What you're seeing on the stage, what you get is often certainly not what is being performed. And there's all sorts of tensions and things going wrong backstage and stuff. It's wonderful to see what people pick up, you know. So Shakespeare has actually got this metaphor of the stage which he's playing about with as well. So he's a magician. He's talking about life as well. That last line says, yeah, and it's not just a play, because your life is just a play as well. And that doesn't hit us until the end, you know, and that is like a sonnet. He's put that in there with a big wallop at the end. So yes, it's a play, and yes, it's dissolving, and I'm a magician, and I'm giving up magic, and magic is just like the theatre, and you're insubstantial too. And you're going to be gone soon too. You're going to melt into thin air and not be there anymore. Right. So, that's where I should have finished for tea, you see. Now, what I'm going to do now, just to move it on a little bit, because it's just as well, because the next thing after that is you've got literally the phrases that should be considered to be first coined by Shakespeare. And I've put chapter and verse in there, and I had to miss out about 10 or 15 of them which are known and which I did have because it didn't fit on 2 sheets. But while I was doing that, in fact, after I'd done it, of course, as is the nature of things, I came across a much better way of doing it. People here of my age will remember Bernard Levin. Remember Bernard Levin? Quite a character, actually. Quite a character.
What a haircut.
Well, yes, indeed. And the only man I actually saw punched in real life on television. And he reacted and responded. He just stood up and carried on with what he was going to say anyway. Now he's done it much better than that. So by all means keep that, and they're actually the chapter and verse of where you'll find them. But this is Bernard Levin doing it much, much better. Okay? Right. The long and the short of it. If you cannot understand my argument and you declare, it's Greek to me, you are quoting Shakespeare. If you claim to be more sinned against than sinning, you're quoting Shakespeare. If you recall your salad days, you're quoting Shakespeare. If you act more in sorrow than in anger, if your wish is farther to the thought, if your lost property has vanished into thin air, you are quoting Shakespeare. If you've ever refused to budge an inch or suffered from a green-eyed jealousy, if you played fast and loose, if you've been tongue-tied, a tower of strength, hoodwinked or in a pickle, if you have knitted your brows, made a virtue of necessity, insisted on fair play, slept not one wing, stood on ceremony, danced attendance on your lord and master, laughed yourself into stitches, had short shrift, cold comfort, or too much of a good thing, if you'd seen better days, or lived in a fool's paradise, why, be it as it may, the more fool you, it's a foregone conclusion that you are, as good luck would have it, quoting Shakespeare. If you think it's early days and clear out bag and baggage, if you think it's high time and that it's the long and short of it, if you believe that the game is up and that the truth will out, even if it involves your own flesh and blood, if you lie low till the crack of doom because you suspect foul play, if you have your teeth set on edge at one fell swoop, without rhyme or reason, then, to give the devil his due, if the truth were known, for surely you have a tongue in your head, you are quoting Shakespeare. Even if you bid me good riddance and send me packing, if you wish I were dead as a doornail, if you think I am an eyesore, a laughing stock, the devil incarnate, a stony-hearted villain, bloody-minded and a blinking idiot, then by Jove, O Lord, tut tut, for goodness sake, what the dickens, but no mean buts, this is one to me, for you are quoting Shakespeare. Just seems to be able to put words together in such a way that they resound. And we, you know, he's coined them and he's actually minted these things, but we just go through, and they just fit together so damned well.
How many of these things, I mean, you can't answer that, but how many might have been in common currency at the time that he's just writing down?
That's right.
Time
we can't know. We can't know. And, you know, even the way they were said and stuff, we're not sure of. We can tell by the way that rhymes are formed that sometimes that some of the words were not said in the same way, and we know that certain words had rather different meanings, like conscience is not what we would think of as word conscience, but it's more like consciousness actually. But we do know that as far as we're concerned, these words came in through the door of Shakespeare, and there's about 10,000 new coinings of words, which is a lot. There's about 20,000 came into the language in the 50 years around his lifetime by other playwrights and people, so it seems to have been a very wordy age. Right, now I need to go on to some questions, but there's one thing I wanted to show you. There's another song sheet, I'm sorry about this, but there's one bit in the middle which I think is important for us to look at. Sorry, if you pass these around, and you guys could take one and pass those around.
Thank you.
There's another sonnet here, which again you could have a look at. It's this last passage. I mean, most of the people that come here are involved in philosophy or aspects of religious thought, and this sheet is literally for us, because the first bit is just purely about literature, and you don't need to have any reference to what he's thinking about. But if you enter into the fact that the sonnets are supposed to be written about either a dark lady or a beautiful boy, there are an awful lot of people who say that actually it's not any of those things, and there's a lot of people historically who said actually what he's describing is a state of being which is both masculine and feminine, and which is literally perfection. And he's talking about it in a certain way, which I've just said before. The closest thing to describe it is to say it's Platonic. It derives from a theory of forms by a chap called Plato, which is about the fact that there is a perfectible, complete and perfect form of things which resides in eternity, and it's approachable by the human mind, but it's very difficult for us to physically attain or to hold in any degree for any length of time. This sonnet has got lots of references in it to that type of philosophy and to literally how we actually can approach the perfect in time, which is what Shakespeare seems to be writing about in most of the sonnets. You know, if you go back to the ones we've already discussed, time was a very important aspect of it, and the fact that holding something in a state of beauty is impossible, and to actually, that time seems to fight against anything beautiful and anything perfect, and seems to allow it to come to fruition and then very rapidly destroys it or fades it away. This sonnet has got many references which seem to be directly pointed at Platonic ideas. Just so that, to move it on a little bit, the bit which I'd like you to pay attention to next is this bit, which is where we said that Shakespeare lifts things completely. This is something which is written by, it's a translation by an Italian. I'll put it at the bottom, Pico della Mirandola, who literally was a follower of Plato, and also of an Egyptian personage who was called Hermes Trismegistus, who is literally thought of as, it's a whole body of spiritual writing which came down from Egypt and was classified, considered by the Greeks and taken as to be of philosophical importance. And this treatment is something which I think it is often put forward as this is to show you that Shakespeare was reading stuff at the time which is directly relevant to philosophy. The actual quote, which I've got it from a lady called Frances Amelia Yates, from a book on Giordano Bruno, and it's a quote from the Italian. "What a great miracle is man, O Aesculapius, a being worth of reverence and honour, for he passes into the nature of a god as though he were himself a god." Now that's the quotation, and Shakespeare is considered to have lifted that virtually unchanged and put it into the mouth of Hamlet, and the speech that follows is Hamlet's, which echoes that. "What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals." Now, two things come to mind when you read that. If Shakespeare has lifted it, he's improved it immensely. If he hasn't, I tend to think he must have read it to have put it in that form. And he's putting it in the mouth of a philosopher, a man who is in the most intense of situations, can't find which way to turn. He's sort of beside himself with frustration, and in that sort of way he's coming out, he's trying to philosophize himself into doing something. So it fits in. This is about the perfection of man, and this is a writing which has come down from Egypt through the Greeks into the Romans, through the Islamic route, and it's an Italian translating it into a language which is then accessible to Europeans. Shakespeare, I think, has read it. But what he's done with it, he's put it into a context, shown how it can be used, shown how a human being in the most intense of situations can use these things to lift himself up to the best that he can be. Okay? What a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And then the downside of that. Same act. Oh what, oh that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. Oh God, God, how weary, stale, flat and unprofitable seem to be all the uses of this world. Fie on it. Ah, fie. It is an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rant and gross in nature possess it merely, that it should come to this. Right. So what you have there is the two movements, if you like, the two contradictions, fighting for expression in Hamlet. If you are interested in philosophy and seeing philosophy, want to see philosophy in movement, take yourself off to see Hamlet, or get out Mel Gibson's version. It's pretty good. He makes a really good fist at Hamlet. There's a very good one just come around recently that's been on at Fact in Liverpool, which I think is much better. But if nothing else, have a look at the Mel Gibson, because you actually see there someone struggling with philosophical ideas, trying to put philosophy into a living situation where he's trapped, and if he moves, if he does one thing, he's a villain, and if he doesn't move, he's also a villain. So he has to find some way of acting in this world, and it's a wonderful trap for his intellect, and the way he breaks out of it in the end is amazing. Anybody here? Have we all seen Hamlet here? Have a look. It's pretty powerful stuff. Right.
Oh, the third line from the bottom.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Fie on it. To hell with it. That's all. Yeah. It's insubstantial. You can't do anything with it. He goes on then to say, it is an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Usually in Shakespeare you'll find one or two words that you can't see. There's one in Sonnet 53, I think, which is... Yeah. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from the bottom. Foison. And it just means abundance, it just means harvest. Just to finish off it, I'll read that to you, but we won't analyse it, we'll just read it, and then if you've any questions, I'll try and answer them. Sonnet 53. What is your substance whereof you are made, whereof are you made? That millions of strange shadows on you tend, since everyone hath, every one shade, and you but one. Can every shadow lend? Describe Adonis, and the counterfeit is purely imitated after you. On Helen's cheek all art of beauty set, and you in Grecian tires are painted new. Tires means clothes or costume. Speak of the spring, and foison of the year, that one doth shadow of your beauty show, the other as your bounty doth appear. And you in every blessed shape we know. In all external grace you have some part, but you like none you, for constant heart. That's a tricky one, and it seems to be completely woven with the philosophy of the time. It's all about the difference between substance and shadow, literally the beingness and nothing. So it's still keeping to the sonnet form, still tying into that with the 3 quatrains and the couplet at the end, but it's taking us quite deeply into what he's meditating on at that time.
What does he mean by shadow here in this context?
Right.
The trillions of strange shadows on U10.
Yes. Now, this is why you have to go into the philosophy of shadow and substance, really, to be able to understand what he's saying. And my argument, I mean, there are lots of scholars who will tell you exactly what he means,
Right.
and they're lying. No one knows. What he's doing there, he's concealing it anyway, so you have to dig. He wants you to dig. You know, it can't be a real shadow because we've got more than one shadow. And shadows are blockages of light. They're absences of light. They're absences of something. They're not something in themselves. So he's playing about with that whole concept of what a shadow is. And the fact that they seem to follow and to hang on and to change, to literally be companions of the substance. They're with it all the time. And again, this being is much greater than them. He's talking again about this perfect being. Here it starts off with Adonis, you know, describe Adonis, and the counterfeit is poorly imitated after you. So in other words, whatever he's talking about is so perfect, even Adonis, the most classical of the gods, the most perfect and beautiful of the gods, isn't up to it. And then he goes on to Helen's cheek, all art of beauty set. Now there's a subtle bit here. He's actually saying that there are also some people who try and paint themselves to look beautiful, you know, and they were perfect classical things, and they can't in any way sort of come up to you. Speak of the spring and of, you know, of abundance of the year. The one doth shadow of your beauty show, and the other your beauty doth appear. So he's reforming the word shadow all the way through the poem. He's changing the meaning of it.
It's such a fundamental metaphor that you can weave anything into it.
That's right.
Or, well, a lot of different things.
But like he did with the word state before, he changed the meaning as the poem went on. He's changing the meaning of shadow. He's giving you different interpretations of it. You know, he does this beautifully. He does this in Julius Caesar, when Mark Antony comes up, you know, after they've killed Caesar, and he asks if he can speak, and he just says he comes to bury Caesar, not to praise him. And the men who've allowed him to speak are honourable men. By the end of the speech, the word honourable makes you want to spit on the floor. He doesn't change it. The meaning of the word changes by the context that he puts it in. He's doing this here. He's using the word shadow to cover so many concepts, if you like. There's at least 4 different ones. But in the Platonic thing, the idea in Plato is that everything has a perfect form. A table has a perfect form. You know what a table should look like. And you've seen green ones and red ones, tall ones and small ones, but you know they're tables. The concept in Plato was that there is tableness, which is in its pure form exists only in eternity. And the tables that you've seen approach it, but they're imperfect copies of the real one that is there, resonating, which we had tried to. And artists in those days would try to get the perfect table. You know, we actually talk about people trying to get the perfect motor or the perfect form. Plato even talks about the fact you've never seen a perfect triangle. You can't make one. There's one in your head. There's one that your mind can aspire to, but any one you draw will never be perfect because the atoms won't line up in the same way. It's just impossible to do. Eugene, you know, my teacher used to say, we've not yet managed to make 2 ball bearings the same. They're all slightly different in their weight, their constitution, even the electrical resistance. They're all slightly different. The universe never allows itself to do. The substance will not copy the form. And this is a very, very important thing in Plato. You know what the perfect should be. You can ascribe to it. You can tune yourself towards it. But as soon as you've got it, it will slip through your fingers again. And you have to pull it back. And you're constantly holding yourself to this perfection of form. And every time you do, it's gone. Isn't Shakespeare just writing here about that perfect form? He's trying to capture it. And he's saying nature approaches it, and then it's gone. And you'll see it, and then it's gone. And that is it's so beautiful when we work towards those moments in our lives. And we try and cherish them, but we can't hold on to them. The substance of us won't allow it. And here we have, you know, there's contradictions here. He's universalizing the situation. If he's writing about a person, and it could be said he's writing about a person here that he deeply loves, then he's universalized the whole situation in the way that he praises them by lifting them out of their humanity and putting them into this great classical universe of perfect shapes. Does that answer your question without answering your question?
More or less.
Yeah.
I find that very interesting, the different readings of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't previously familiar with any of these sonnets. What's particularly interesting for me is what I would call, or what I, for my own benefit, would call the gospel music reading.
Yeah.
And this is kind of rooted in the interest that I've had over the years in the difference between gospel music and soul music.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially a transition which came about around about the late 50s into the early 60s, where essentially a very particular musical form with really only one subject matter that the lyrics of the words were written to,
Yeah.
which was praise of God,
Yeah.
praise of Jesus, Son of God, or and what happens in soul music is exactly the same music, but the beloved,
Mm-hmm.
that's the, if you like, the object of the praise, shifts to being a girl or a boy.
Yes.
Okay. That's actually the only real change, so it becomes secular rather than sacred.
Which is exactly the same root as this, yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. So when I read this with a gospel reading, it's reading it, like it were written as a gospel
Yeah.
song. So you read it as though what is being referred to is God or Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, and it reads,
Yes.
in a very particular way, and at another level.
And it is particularly this because the difference you see, if you read through the plays, and a lot of people say, well, Shakespeare's a good Catholic, he makes all these references to perfection, and in a sense he does, because the Platonists would say, well, Christ is a really perfected being, but we're all on the same route, and we're all going there. And we're all perfectible to some degree. And tragedy, which Shakespeare writes tragedy, is literally the fact of somebody who gets very, very close, but because of some fault, some substantial fault in them, their own cause. When we sort of say, oh, it's a tragedy that he died in the accident, well, it's not a true tragedy unless it's a fault in the person's nature that brings them down. It's got to be something that they have control over at some point in their life, and they didn't. So a true tragedy has got to be rooted in a fault inside that person. So they would then say that, okay, that they are literally tried to establish this perfect form in human life, and they haven't managed it. So it's exactly the same thing, literally, as this perfectibility of human, or if you like, the casting it out and say, well, we human beings, approach that, the perfect. And you'll all have come across somebody where you've all had a perfect day or a perfect hour, when things have just gelled together perfectly. And that is, so you could be a Platonist alongside a group of Christians in exactly the same way and go along with everything they've said, but just want to go a bit further. And they would say, that Christ is talking about the same perfectibility of the human nature, as though he doesn't sort of say, I'm the only one that's ever done it. He's just sort of saying that this is how you do it when you do it, and this is what it looks like when it's happened. So they would go along with this. And that's why with Shakespeare, a lot of his characters in his plays are moving towards this. They are trying to be perfect in some way. So yeah, that fits in completely with that analogy. Does this make sense to everyone? Can you follow what I'm saying here?
Could I ask quite a basic question?
Please.
From a basic sort of question. It's difficult to put into words, really. It seems from what you're saying that there's two aspects to your understanding or your enjoyment or whatever of Shakespeare. One is the sort of the enjoyment of the sound of the words, in the same way that, say, Dylan Thomas would write words which ebb and flow and sound nice and never mind the meaning. There's that aspect, and there's the understanding of it.
Yeah.
So presumably, if, as I know has often happened, it's translated into some sort of 21st century English or 20th century English, you may, assuming that the person who'd done the writing had a reasonable understanding himself, you may get a better understanding, but would you then lose the ebb and flow of the...
Yes.
So is there any justification for modern translations, if you like? Because on the one hand, they might help you to understand it better, but on the other hand, you might lose the... For instance, I'm sure there's a lot of people who listen to Shakespeare, watch Shakespeare, like occasionally I have done. I've enjoyed the sound of the words, but don't really know what it's all about.
Most of us are like that, and because I would say you're just on the cusp of it. Probably in another 50 years, the language will have changed so much. I mean, they're now saying that the average English speaker speaks with an Indian accent, because there are more people in India speaking English now than there are in the Western world. And you know, the language is changing dramatically because of their input. So language is changing and it's leaving him behind in many senses. I think we can approach it when if the actors actually do study with the language and work with it, they will give you the sense of what's actually being said. If you watch a good production, you don't feel that it's in antique language. We've only got a few more years of that. But maybe that is why, and people say this about the Germans, because the Germans actually consider to be Shakespeare one of their writers. They value him very highly. But they are reading Schiller's interpretation of Shakespeare that was written 100 years ago. So they're reading a 100-year-old German spoken literally by a poet. So they don't have the same problem that we have with 400-year-old access to Shakespeare. And again, in some of the plays it's worse than others. But I would say with a little bit of effort, you can actually drag it back. It's only just gone out of parlance, you know, only just. And because he is so much, all those quotations we've just said are literally everyday language. So he's right there with us if we wanted to get involved.
So would you find that if you started watching more and more Shakespeare, you would start to understand his language, the language of the time better?
Yes.
Yeah.
And your own language as well, because he's giving us a bigger vocabulary. The thing we have to say, the reason why Phil Davis and these neuroscientists are involved with watching what language does in the brain is because language is the biggest thing for developing human brains. It's the thing that correlates with intelligence in every country in the world. You can even be more specific and say reading stretches the brain and develops it more than anything else. And so wherever you look in every country, in all systems of education, it's reading and size of vocabulary that literally equates with intelligence. Now whether that's because of the intelligence tests, but they try to go around it as many persons, they say it just makes brains extremely flexible and so much faster than they were before. You know, it's a quantum leap when you actually improve your vocabulary and you start to play about with words like that, because it's the very fabric of thought forms. If you can't put something into words, you cannot really think it. And if you could, you couldn't express it to anybody else. It's a dead thought, you know.
And what about emotional intelligence, intuition and stuff like that? Because it seems to me that too much reading and too many ideas are detrimental to that other dimension.
I think, in a sense, that's what they mean by this learned ignorance, that you stay with the direct perception of the world, you keep your heart grounded in that, but you also have the intelligence to be able to describe what it is that's going on, because what you feel with Shakespeare in this is that he's actually describing feeling states very well.
Absolutely.
So he can do that belies what we've just said, but also he's underpinning it by bringing it back to the love, which he thinks is going to be the most important thing. The end of that.
He's not living in a time where children are lined up and schooled from early on and shoved into their rational brain.
Well, strangely enough, only in the interval we were talking about the fact that they were schooled for 12 hours.
Really?
And it was mostly Latin translation that they were doing.
Good Lord.
But hang on, just
And you know, so yes, and they were beaten if they didn't study, you know.
Right.
So much worse, you could say. Much worse. Sorry.
What's coming up for me from this is really, if you like, a correspondence with what you were saying about the audience. Right? You talked about the groundlings, the merchants, the aristocrats, this sort of three-tier audience, and Shakespeare writing, if you like, in a register or at a level of action right, for each of those audiences. So couldn't we actually say, we're all right in that sense, because all three things are going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
Right? So you can deconstruct it, analyse it intellectually,
Yeah.
the stories, and pick it apart the way we have been doing, or you can enjoy the belly laughs,
Yes.
right, as the groundlings, or
Yeah.
you take it in the heart level, which is, I think, that the more the level you were talking about, where you just let the poetry speak to the heart and you absorb it that way. So that's what's kind of coming through to me, that actually all three things are going on simultaneously, and that's all correct, and that's part of the brilliance of the
Yes.
isn't it?
And of course, these guys would go home thinking, well, you know, that Shakespeare really knows, and people say this about kingliness. You know, they just say Henry V is the greatest leader described in words that we've got. So they use him in sort of leadership conferences with business. Powerful gear, you know, once more into the breach. And these fellows once more into the breaching all over the place. And, you know, there are also romantics who would say, well, this is the language, you know, if music be the food of love, well, I mean, he can do that too. And the number of things, I mean, we're only talking also about the sonnet, which, again, we didn't read, because sonnet 116, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment. So we have here literally a discursive commentary on what is love. And something like Midsummer Night's Dream is all about love. It's just about literally courtship and how you get the right girl. So, yeah, so he's doing that. And then the groundlings would sort of say, well, yes, he's also got an awful lot of humour. And if you think of the mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream, you know, they can hardly string a sentence together. And one of them is a great buffoon who wants to play all the parts, you know, including being a lion, because he can roar so gently, he's like a dove. So, I mean, the level at which he can pitch this and pull you in, yeah. And again, we're talking about somebody who I don't think has been beaten in the past 400 years in terms of his ability to write. So,
I mean, anecdotally, I heard something on a radio program recently where I can't remember who it was, but they were saying that actually it was quite common for Shakespeare's plays to be literally halted mid-performance to bring on the clowns. You know, to troop the clowns in, you had to give the groundlings something to kind of keep them interested, you know,
well,
and then troop them out again and carry on with the text.
well, it's like, you know, we do have this, there are ridiculous scenes in Shakespeare, like Exit chased by a bird, which is a classic one, which is always quoted, you know, in Twelfth Night. But Shakespeare in Love, where they say, you know, okay, love story, but it's got to have a dog in it. And his producer says to him, you know, okay, well, you do a love story, but there's got to be a dog in it. And this is the sort of thing that happens in real theatre, you know, because the chap who comes along, and there were clowns in Shakespeare's company, he had to write parts for. If you look at Hamlet, you think it's wonderful stuff, and then you come about, yeah, but hang on, there's a gravedigger. And the gravedigger is called a droll. It's a type of humour which we don't really have anymore. It's somebody who is so down in the mouth, you have to laugh. Who's the Scottish comedian, the last sort of droll? Oh dear.
Murray?
Chick Murray was a droll. So you've got, if you read The Gravedigger as that, and the things he's saying about Yorick, you know, and the puns that they make, it's a droll. And Shakespeare's written that because they had a droll in the company. And you've got to use him, you know. And other parts are done. literally because someone's got to get off and get changed and get back on again. So you have to have a little scene. You can't just stop and have dark, dead stage. You've got to put something in between. And this is what, there's a wonderful one in Macbeth where somebody has to open the gate and there's lots of, open the gate! Oh, give me a minute. You know, it's because someone's getting changed. You know, King's just come off, he's got to come back on again in his dressing gown. He's got to, you know, have the gate. Well, the fellow doesn't open the gate, does he? I'm asleep. Open the gate! You know, it's just, it's 5 minutes of business while, you know, Macbeth gets his coat on.